Hello, everyone. Daniel Torres Dwyer here, founder of Dwyer Partners, the executive search firm focused on top talent in consumer goods and retail, bringing you another episode of the Lead and Thrive podcast. Hope you're enjoying the new episodes. As mentioned, you can always get in touch with me for suggestions and questions to ask future guests. Today, we're going to speak about leadership. When we think about leaders, we think they have to be firm, tough, untouchable, or that's at least the tradition that we have. But on the other hand, when we think of an ideal company culture, we probably think more of something where we can bring our own selves, be empathetic, and enjoy working with others. How can we reach a common ground between these? To discuss this, I have the pleasure to have Carol Robert with me today. She's currently heading up the UK and Ireland business for Suntory Food and Beverage. And I look forward to learning more about her leadership journey and how she sees leadership today. Thanks for joining us today, Carol. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Despite the lockdown situation in the UK that we were talking about just now and the bad weather, you seem to be in very good spirits, nevertheless.
Well, it's a game of resilience, isn't it? And I think we've been through it before. We've got through it before. We've had lots of training, I would argue. Lots and lots of training last year. So we're putting it into practice. And the most important thing is to stay positive.
That's correct. No, I agree. So, and I think that you're a good example of that. As a matter of introduction, Carol, maybe you can tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do right now at Suntory.
Okay. So my name is Carol Robert. I started my career at a company called Kimberly-Clark on the graduate program around 20 years ago. And at that time, the graduate program allowed me to leave the UK and to have some fantastic learning in Spain. I worked in Madrid for a few years, which was phenomenal. I then had lots of different moves across marketing, sales, category management, revenue management through the years. And 11 years later, I left that company to join GlaxoSmithKline.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was extremely lucky to be part of the team at GlaxoSmithKline that sold the soft drinks business, the Lucozade and Ribena business to Suntory. And I've been here since. I am now the Chief Operating Officer of Great Britain and Ireland. It's a real privilege to have such a critically important role, overseeing around 700 people. And of course, what's most important in that role is really leadership. And that's a real passion of mine, which I'd love to talk to you about today.
Yeah. No, and just to clarify, by the way, because I think your title is a bit unusual compared to like what you would find in other companies. If I'm not wrong, COO in your case is like basically like general manager or country manager, at least for your region, right?
Yes. Chief Operating Officer is like a general manager. It's slightly wider scope because essentially you've got Great Britain and Ireland. So I do have a general manager for Ireland that reports into me. So it's because it's a slightly wider region, if you like, that it's called a Chief Operating Officer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. Like, I think that one thing that we see, like as you advance in your career, more than the functional knowledge, which I'm sure you still it's still useful to you and helps generate credibility. I think that the most important trait that a leader can have is that leadership ability and leadership experience and then ability to execute it. No,
I couldn't agree more. I think these times are testament to that. And I truly believe that people follow people, right? And leadership is the most important part of that. So, of course, we all have to have functional experience because that is part of the journey to becoming the leaders that we are. And that's what enables us to ask the right question at the right time or give the right feedback at the right time or support if that's the best thing to do. So functional competence is critical. But most importantly, when you get to a certain level, it really is about putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and asking yourself, what's needed of me as a leader right now in this moment to help that person in front of me.
Yeah. Where did that all start? So you joined Kimberly-Clark in the grad program. When was your first management experience? The first time that you had to get into someone else's shoes?
So my first management experience was actually when I was pretty young. And I have to say, it was probably the experience that I learned most from.
Mm-hmm.
I was 27 at the time, and I was promoted to head of marketing for the Andrex brand, which is the biggest brand within Kimberly-Clark for UK and Ireland. And the reality was, all of my experience and success had been delivered from doing, from performing, from having answers, from knowing how to get things done. Of course, collaboration and team spirit. But when I was promoted to that role, I spent a couple of years in that role, and I realised myself at the end of the role that I hadn't set that team up for success. And nobody helped me to see at that time that all of the things that had made me successful to that point were actually things that I had to unlearn and learn new skills. And so it was quite a painful experience, because I thought I was achieving by still having the answers when people came round with questions, maybe rescuing the team rather than coaching them or enabling them to find their own answers. And I came to that realization when I was about to leave the role. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback I've heard from someone, which really, really sticks with me, is the best test to leadership is what happens when you're not there. Because if you've set up your team well to know how to navigate through things, to ask themselves the questions, if you've coached them well, then they should be able to keep navigating on their own. But if they're very dependent on you,
Yeah.
because your leadership presence is critical and you have all the answers and you're very maybe controlling, then they won't be able to do that. And that was quite a painful lesson. And I look back at that team and I really feel bad for the fact that I didn't truly set them up for success. And that was when I actually went to my boss at the time and I said, you have to now put me into a leadership role where I have absolutely no functional knowledge whatsoever.
Wow.
Because I have to truly learn how to be a leader.
How did that moment of self-awareness come? Because normally I think that our ego is more powerful than actually that doesn't allow us to see that, right? And I think that sometimes we lie to ourselves, focusing on the good things that we're doing, but not on the bad things. What was the moment of realization for you?
I think the moment of realization for me was when I was gathering feedback, end of year feedback, and the feedback around delivering results, commercial acumen, strategy, execution, collaboration were all very, very strong. But the feedback on developing people and having a high performing team was very, very poor. And that was a bit of an aha moment where you're absolutely right. When you're young, ambitious, and you're developing at pace, you might sort of look and go, oh, well, I can only do what I'm doing. It's not my fault if the team are not where they need to be. But actually, this feedback was combined with a training course all around leadership and assertiveness, and very much holding the mirror up to yourself. And the combination of the internal feedback and that course made me realize that a lot of it was from my leadership style. It was from the impact that I was having on the team. And it was from the fact that I wasn't coaching, I wasn't empowering them, and I wasn't setting them up to be successful on their own.
Yeah. Do you think that came from like typical lack of leadership experience, or was it maybe from like a certain role model that you'd seen in your earlier career that you thought that was the right way to lead?
I think it was mainly driven by the fact that a lot of my experience had been in marketing. So I was gaining greater functional expertise in marketing. So it was becoming easier for me to have the answers. And it was like a shortcut to pleasing people. It was a shortcut to proving that I could add value. You know, when people came round with a difficult challenge, I could find an answer, I could find a solution. And it was a bit of a negative trap, but it was making me feel that I was adding value the more I was doing it. And really the realization came when as I said, I looked around and I thought, what about the other guys? How have I helped them to add value? How am I helping them to find the right answers? And it was a stark realization that that was something that I hadn't done. But also, I think when you get lots of recognition for doing a certain behavior, you repeat it, you
Yeah.
continue it. That's the model. And there are certain points in our career, and it's hard to know when they are. And some people never make it. But there's certain points in your career where you have to almost unlearn everything that got you to where you are, and then learn new skills that are going to be the ones that are going to take you to the new place as to where you will be tomorrow.
Yeah, and I guess that's what you were looking for a bit when you asked your boss at that time to change you into another leadership role, but in another function, I assume. What happened then?
So what happened then is I got a role leading the category management team.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, I really had very little knowledge of what that team done or how they added value or the interactions they had with the customers. So the first couple of months, I have to say, it felt quite lonely. And when I was talking to the team or having one-to-ones, all I could do was follow the classic grow model. What's your goal? What's your reality? What might be your options? And what will you do as a result? And I felt like I was adding no value whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, oh, is this job for me? You know, all I do is ask them questions.
Yeah.
They must leave my office thinking, why have I got a boss if all you ever do is just ask me questions? And it took a while for me to realize that that was actually a good technique. And over time, the more I was asking these questions, the more I was giving the team space to find creative answers to impress me with their
Mm-hmm.
thinking, to step in to find a solution,
Mm-hmm.
and to come along feeling more confident and feeling like they've added value because they've come up with the solution themselves. And all I did was maybe get them to think about pros and cons or point them in the direction of what might happen if you take that course of action versus that course of action. And after a bit of time, it's a different way of feeling valued. It's slower, it's less immediate, but ultimately it's much more powerful because it's all about that other person finding the solution that's best for them.
And how long were you in this category management role?
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years. What type of feedback did you get on this role? Because obviously, when you were leading in marketing, you were getting very good feedback on the executional side, the technical side, not so much on the people development side. What was the overall feedback in category management?
Well, this was a role that really changed the feedback that I was getting on my competencies. And much more of the feedback was around developing vision.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I did with the team is we spent time thinking about what's our purpose? What's our vision? How can we be adding value to the customers? And so it was vision, it was strategy, it was high performing team, it was developing people. It was a different set of behaviors that I was being recognized for.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, functional knowledge, after a little while, you can build it. So after 6 months, I did start to learn a bit about category management, the arguments that we take to customers, the triple win, if you like. Why is it right for the consumer, the customer, the shareholder? So I did start to gain some technical knowledge, which
Mm-hmm.
was also helpful. But what was different this time is I was gaining that technical knowledge from a leadership stance. I was able to help the team to use any knowledge I had through questions or probes or thoughts versus giving answers.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much from a different perspective.
How has that learning experience helped you in your future career? Because now, obviously, how many people are you managing now? And how many people are there in your organization?
So in our business is around 700 people.
Okay, so you can obviously not know all the details, or maybe you do, but I'd be very surprised. How did that initial learning experience help you develop, but also be able to lead what you lead today?
So that critical experience, as painful as it was, from realizing that I wasn't doing the right things as a leader, to putting myself in to the deep end to learn it, was absolutely fundamental for my career, and it changed my entire mindset. That is the role that set me up for success, because from that point onwards, having had the experience of doing, giving the answers, performing, giving confidence, to also the vision, strategy, developing people, developing teams, and now have a broader spectrum of competencies that I can tap into for different situations. And I suppose that is the key learning from all of this. And the one that I choose to work with is all around situational leadership. It's about, what does the person in front of me need right now? How expert are they at this thing that they're trying to work on? And do they need to be shown? Do they need to be told? Do they need to be coached? Or do they just need the nod to say, you're doing great, keep going? And having had the spectrum of the different experiences, I now take a lot more time to think about, what's the situation in front of me and what is the best leadership style to apply to that situation. And that's critical, because if you haven't had those lessons, you can be coaching somebody 20 times on something that they just need to be shown. Just show them once and then they can get it.
Yeah.
Or you can be constantly telling somebody the answer when they need to be coached.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I just need you to ask me questions so that I can go off and find my own answer. So both experiences have been really, really valuable. And now what it means is, as a leader, we have very limited time. So it's important that we make the right choices at the right time. And that really is about assessing the situation, what the person needs, and what's the best style for that situation.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I think that with learning, I think there's like 3 or 4 ways of learning, right? There's people, I think, that if you explain them how it works, they get it. But for example, for me, and with learning, and for example, with a game of cards, they can explain it to me like 3 times. But if I don't see it happen, I can tell you I don't get it. So, so I think that comes, it's the same with work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that means, as a leader, you have to have the headspace to be thinking about the person in front of you and where they are, which obviously, if you think about the context right now with the uncertainty outside, the stress, the anxiety, if we are just going from meeting to meeting and thinking that fast-paced decisions and giving answers is the way to manage, then we're not in that headspace.
Yeah.
And we're not adapting our styles to the people in front of us. And that is a big, big risk right now.
Yeah. I mean, how have you translated or transported your leadership experience to the situation where we were all into lockdown? Because I think that you were kind of hinting to that, right?
Yes. So if we start at the beginning with lockdown one, I think lockdown one, there was a bit of, we didn't know what we didn't know. And so I think a lot of people in any organization were a little bit fueled by the adrenaline of the uncertainty. Let's just get through this. It's a short-term crisis. We can pull together and we can navigate our way through it. And I think that was the sheer resilience and energy and adrenaline that got us through the first wave. And it was just a case there as a leader of ensuring that we were consistently making sure people were safe, physically and mentally safe, and that we were adapting and pivoting to the context. The second lockdown became a bit more tricky because people just felt disconnected. They felt bored. They were like, not this again. There's no longer any uncertainty. Now I know what I know, and I'm not thrilled by the prospect of going through this anymore. And there it's really about psychological stamina. It really is about how you get the minds to the right place. And one of the things that's worked quite well for us is ensuring that there's a concept of tough empathy. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it's a real adult to adult conversation taking place versus very parent child. The risk through the second lockdown is that because people are tired, there's mental fatigue, there's anxiety and there's stress. the organization can fall into a trap of helplessness. And sometimes it's the leaders that put them there without actually knowing. And if I just give you a few examples, if you are in a business where you're constantly too much swaying towards support, reassurance, comforting, then basically you can, without realizing you're doing it, you can make people become helpless.
Okay.
And essentially what happens there is you fall into the victim trap where we're all victims to COVID and there's no way out and it's all doom and gloom. And then every solution or every answer has to be pushed up to the top levels of leadership. Whereas if you navigate it in a very adult to adult way, which is a balance between, yes, we're here to support. Yes, we realize people have got deep, anxious issues right now that we need to listen to. But let's not be victims to COVID. Let's get through this together. Let's raise the bar. Let's think about solutions that can push us through. Then you find that people feel like they have more of a place. They feel like they have a responsibility to act, to be resilient, to find solutions. And so it's a constant balance, I think, between those two. And obviously, where there's real, genuine issues that require support, it's important to be supportive in that moment. But I would say that there is quite a big difference between empathy and sympathy. And leaders have to be careful of which role they're playing. Because empathy is very much, I hear you, I'm listening, I'm with you, I recognize the situation, but here's where we've got to go now. And we're going to get through this. And I believe that you can do it. And I believe that we'll do it together. Whereas sympathy is something quite different. So that, I think, is one of the most critical leadership techniques, not only through COVID, but obviously coming out the other side. And it's going to be important for all organizations to ensure they constantly have that balance.
Yes, especially I'm curious to know from your perspective as someone that, if you like it or not, people are going to be looking up to you and looking at practically everything you do, and that you have to be very consistent. Typical traditional leadership style is about like really not showing any type of like weakness, no? And it's like having like a very clear mind, clear direction. How do you balance that? But that can be like very impersonal, right? How do you balance that with that empathy side? Obviously, sympathy is out of the cards, but how do you combine it with being empathetic and also making the organization as a whole feel it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think being vulnerable is critical. Tough empathy isn't about being steely and just denying that there's tough stuff going on. It really is about recognizing what's going on, being realistic about where we are, but being optimistic about what we can do about it and where we can go. So the first thing that I've tried to do is just be human and just be me. The first lockdown, I juggled 2 young kids, homeschooling. My little boy was 14 months old.
Wow.
So that was extremely difficult because if he wants to crawl up on your leg at a moment where you got a very important call, there is nothing that you can do about that.
Yeah.
And he will do it. So it was a real challenging period. And it was a good 8 weeks of struggle. And at the same time, I had to keep my organization safe. I had to keep the business going for the future. I had to be listening to people. I had to be approachable. And of course, I couldn't do it all. It's not possible to do it all. So it was fundamentally about choices. And one of the key things that was useful for me was, for example, my PA would help me by setting up telephone calls rather than video calls.
Okay.
So that I could take the kids out for a walk, the pram and the 6-year-old, go for a walk, get them some air, get them outside, and then still have a call to be available to somebody. So I was constantly adapting my ways of working to be able to be relevant to my home situation. At lunchtime, my kids have to eat, right? I can't be in a meeting or a call at lunchtime because my kids have to get fed. It just
It
is what
doesn't
it is.
work.
It doesn't work. And I didn't hide that from anyone.
Yeah.
You know, I was very clear about what my boundaries were.
Yeah.
I made it clear to people when I would be working, when I wouldn't be working, when I would be available and when I wouldn't. And then I also role modeled, I think, what a lot of the organization was going through, which is we just have to balance what we can do through this. We have to manage our home situation and manage our work situation. And we're not superheroes. There's going to be really bad days. We're all going to have really bad days. There'll be calls where kids come in, they're making noise, they're in the background, they're disrupting you. All of that is just totally normal. And I think the fact that I was able to role model it, and for real, I role modeled it, you know, because it was really happening.
Yeah.
It gave people a lot of confidence that that's just how it is just now. And it's totally acceptable. You know, if I can't be on a call or if I'm juggling my kids or if I have to feed my kids. And I think that makes a big difference for people.
Do you think, like now reflecting, maybe thinking of a year from now, when in theory things will be back to a certain normality, that being going back into the office and not being restricted to our households, being able to travel a bit, etc. Do you think that we'll go back to like the leadership? What will it look like it did before? Is it going to look different? Is it going to look completely different?
So I think it will look quite different. I think
Really?
the first thing that will happen is, for lack of having these connections and social dialogue, people will want it more. That's the first thing. So people will want it. People will want to connect more. They want to have team meetings. They'll want to have face-to-face conversations. But I don't think it will go back to the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday office. And any organization out there that wants to move with the times needs to realize that the COVID intervention has changed things forever. We can't ask people to go back to that old world, because actually the organization, and I'm sure it's true for most organizations, people have proven that they can be successful working virtually.
Yeah.
People can be trusted. People can be accountable. And in the new world where we do all have lots of things to juggle, you know, whether it's our own families, whether it's we care for someone, whether it's activities that we want to do within the community, you know, to have purpose and to have meaning, we need to enable people to have some flex in the way that they work. And so I think the future will be people coming into the office to have team meetings, to connect, to have social dialogue, but not every day and not within strict hours where they maybe feel like they're being watched or they have to be there or it's critical for everyone to be in by 9. I think all of that is going to be gone.
And as a leader, like obviously showing vulnerability and empathy has been very effective in this time period where people actually needed that type of leadership. Do you think that is still going to remain? Is that still going to be effective?
The most critical leadership attribute for any leader is empathy, and will always be empathy. And if we think about the speed at which data and algorithms and the speed of technology and getting us to answers through data and science, the only thing that leaders and humans can bring that all of those AI techniques in the future cannot bring is empathy. Yeah. Because eventually a lot of these machines are probably going to get to better answers than we can on the best commercial plan or the best pricing strategy or the best promotional strategy. But what they won't be able to do is to pick up or sense how a person's feeling when they're presenting something. Are they feeling confident? Are they reluctant? Is there something I can do to help them? And so empathy is the skill of the future for leaders. And it's the one that we really need to be dialing up now, because it's where truly we can make a difference versus the AI technology, which really is moving fast.
And do you think, what about like on the other hand, so we have empathy and we also have then taking tough decisions and giving tough feedback. which, as you said, is not opposite to being empathetic. Where do you think that has a place in leadership in the future as well? Or why do you think it's critical?
So for me, the winning combination is tough empathy. And I don't think empathy goes against doing the tough stuff. I have a fundamental belief that if you care enough about someone, you will give them the clear feedback as to what they need to change, because you care about them getting better and you care about the outcome of that conversation. And I always say to my team, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And I think that is genuinely true for a leader. If you are clear with somebody about how things stand, you give them the choice to get better. You give them the choice to take your feedback or not and do something with it. But if you don't give them the feedback, then it's very unfair and it's very unkind, because essentially you're asking someone to improve on something that you believe they should improve on, but without being clear with them.
Yeah.
So for me, these two things have to go together. If we genuinely care about people and if we genuinely care about the long-term delivery of our business, we will have tough empathy. We will have constructive conflict. We will bring diverse views into a meeting room. And the reason we bring diverse views into a meeting room is because we believe that we can get to better outcomes by harnessing our collective differences, right? And we will encourage those conversations, even if they're uncomfortable, because you get to a better outcome when you've listened to diverse points of view. It's very easy to go in and say, I've got one view, that's the answer, let's proceed from here. And people might come with you for a little while.
Yeah.
But if you want real commitment to where you're going, the best thing to do is to hear people, to listen to the diverse views. And even if that leaves you with a difficult decision, 50% the room, 50% the room are over this side, then you make a decision and people will come with you because they've been heard, because their voice has been heard, and because you explain to them why we're now having to go in that direction. So empathy, I cannot emphasize enough. It is the leadership attribute of the future. And tough empathy is where the difference will lie for those companies that are going to be sustainably successful over time.
No, well, this is really interesting, but I think it goes really tied also with like building a culture and things that actually will be a huge competitive advantage for companies.
Yes, totally agree. And culture is something that, there's good cultures out there. There's probably no bad cultures out there, but the answer really lies on what is the culture that's right for you.
That's correct.
And it very much depends on what you're trying to do. Where are you trying to go? Where are you today? And what is the right culture for you? And it has to be done authentically.
Yeah.
I think that's quite key. People can sense when maybe you've got words on the wall for the sake of saying that you've got a culture, but actually the behaviors or the things that you do are not in line with those words. And people just see through it immediately.
Yeah.
It becomes so obvious because everywhere I look in the room, there's these words. And yet when I look around me, there's none of the actions. So culture needs to be unique. It needs to be authentic, and it must be role modeled by the leaders.
I agree. And I hope that the people that are listening take good note about that. Carol, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely, Daniel. Take care of yourself.